Lao Tzu said, "To know others is wisdom, but to know yourself is enlightenment." But I say, if you want to know either of those, you have to start by understanding our words. Have you ever had the experience of talking to someone only to have them pause and say, "Wait, what does that word mean?" And then upon reflection, you realize, I've been using this word and I think I know what it means, but I can't figure out how to define it. Well, if you haven't had that experience yet, I can assure you at least every parent has had that experience at one point. And I don't just mean for the dirty words.
Well, if you guys have any other questions, we're here for you.
What's an orgasm?
There is nothing in this world that influences your thinking, your relationship to others, and how you see the world around you than your language. And yet it is the thing I find most people take for granted.
Yes, I think I said earlier that our language, English,
as spoken by us,
as we speak it, yes, certainly defines it. We are defined by our language, if you will.
Hello, we're talking about language.
For example, we use words every day, thinking that they mean the same thing to us as they do to the people we're talking to, and most of the time, they don't. If you don't understand the hidden meaning of words, then you are in a certain way helpless to have full control over your thinking and are somewhat at the mercy of others. And the meanings to those words aren't in the dictionary. In this episode, I am going to help you understand how words truly get their meaning and how much of an impact that has on you and everything around you in a way you never thought possible. This is Words Matter. How our brains process words is a huge field of study intersecting with psychology, neurology, complex systems, philosophy, and even what we mistakenly call AI. But that's a different video. For example, there's prototype theory. Basically, the way this works is that our brains build prototype rough images of words based on how we categorize them in our brains. So, for example, when I say the word bird, your brain produces kind of a fuzzy, basic shape of a bird, probably looking like something like the Twitter logo. However, when we start getting more specific and saying things like goose or canary or robin, then you start producing more and more specific details to help separate out those images. But it's called prototype theory because we in our brains form a basic prototype image for these different words. There is also a theory called language network theory. And in this theory, our brain processes words based on how many connections they have. So in this case, the word bird would be higher up in the hierarchy of our brains because it has so many connections to things like goose, canary, and robin, and then connections form down from there. And that keeps going down until you get to just one specific connection, like that goddamn bird chasing me from my car into the office every time I go in. But while these theories, like many others, do offer us some insight into how our brains process words, the most important thing, and the thing I want you to understand most, is that our brains categorize words first and foremost by our feelings. For example, if I say the word eggplant, some of you may start getting a sense of craving. Some of you may have a feeling of disgust. But many of you probably don't realize I'm talking about food. And that's because we live in a dystopian reality where your primary exposure to a piece of food is through emojis used by immature juveniles who can't have direct conversations about sex. Whatever your initial reaction was to the word eggplant, you're a rational person, so you can understand that the term eggplant should fit under a category of vegetable. And when I say that, your brain starts associating eggplant with all the other different vegetables that you have in your mind. But wait, I lied to you. Eggplant is a fruit. Go ahead and Google it. See, it sounded right when I said it was a vegetable, because eggplant feels like a vegetable. And that's how we process words. We think of vegetables as kind of bland. They're not as fun, maybe savory at best. But whereas fruit, on the other hand, we think of as sweet or tangy or fun. So it just made sense when I said eggplant to process it as vegetable, because that's your feeling. This concept was first introduced by Gottlieb Fried, and I'm not even going to pretend that I'm saying that right, in 1892 in a paper called On Sense and Reference. And you can probably already guess that the paper says that we define words by both a sense and a reference. So a sense, in a way, is the feelings I'm describing to you now, and reference is like what we talked about before with like language network theory or prototype theory. On Sense and Reference is considered to this day one of the greatest philosophical works on language. However, I'm sure many academics will take offense at the overly simplistic way I'm presenting it, to which I say, the truth is, the majority of words we use every day, the majority of the sounds coming out of our mouths, have no conscious meaning at all. They're just feelings. I'll give you another example. If you are watching this video with someone, and if not, pretend that you are, turn to them now and tell them what the word good means. Go on, I'll wait. See? You can't, can you? And that's because the word good, a word you use almost every day and have probably used several times even today, is a word that has no conscious meaning in your brain and is entirely a feeling. By the way, for all you cheaters who tried to go and look it up in the dictionary, you'll find that that isn't much help either. We assume we all understand the word good, but we can't define it. Just think, that's good. You did good. It tastes good. Be good. Have a good time. It's good to be here. Good luck. It is a word defined entirely by our feelings and experiences. But why is this important? Well, we assume we all know what the word good means, but we're wrong. Feelings and experiences are subjective, and they change from person to person. And what one person feels and experiences is not the same for everyone else. For example, one person can eat an eggplant and they'll say, "Ugh, this is terrible." And another person could eat an eggplant and go, "Hey, this is pretty good." And yes, I'm still talking about food. Now, it doesn't take much thought to realize what's really going on here. When someone says, "Ugh, that's terrible," what they're really saying is, "I don't like it." And when someone says, "Hey, that's really good," they're saying, "I like it."
I like it.
Yeah!
However, when we flip or replace our personal subjective experiences with expressions that sound universally true, we start to get into a problem. If the eggplant is good, then maybe the person who doesn't like it is bad. And while that sounds absurd, those little subconscious replacements can add up over time. Oh, but Chris, that's silly. People would never do that with food. Oh, really? Have you ever tried to order pizza in a large group of people? That can destroy relationships. Okay, I know this may seem harmless or trivial. After all, if people get offended over who likes eggplant, still talking about food, they have other problems in their relationship. But what if people use this kind of confusion on purpose?
President and Vice President had hamburgers for lunch. President reportedly had Dijon mustard.
Who eats a cheeseburger with Dijon mustard?
All right, to truly understand how language is used to manipulate people, we have to understand one other concept. The majority of your feelings and your thoughts and your language lives in your subconscious mind. Now, when I say the word subconscious, I'm going to start getting myself into trouble because that means a lot of different things depending on if you're talking about psychology or neurology or even philosophy. So, to be clear, when I say subconscious, I simply mean anything that you do that you're not specifically focusing on. For example, when you touch a hot stove and go, ouch, your brain isn't going through an intentional conscious process of going, what is the best way to express myself in this dire situation?
What's the right thing to say? Ow? Ow. Ow!
You're just reacting based on your past conditioning. The reason infants and young children cry so much is because they have yet to develop the words needed to express their feelings. And so all we have is a just great frustration of not being able to communicate what we're really feeling to another person. As a matter of fact, even as we grow up, this feeling follows us. If we are in a situation where we feel unable to truly express how we're feeling and be understood by another person, that turns into frustration and often causes us to cry and get upset. This reality is so fundamental to the human experience that the entire process of personal growth and maturity can almost entirely be defined as the process of bringing the subconscious mind into the conscious mind. And that work is done primarily through language. This is why you go to therapy. If you go to therapy, a good therapist is someone that helps you find the words you need to express how you feel. Because simply putting the words and having a way to define and understand what you're feeling gives you more control over it. Oh, and that reminds me, today's video is not sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp, exploiting America's drastic mental health crisis to gain a lot of profit off of underpaid and underappreciated therapists and psychologists. Again, that's BetterHelp, a poor substitute for actual healthy human relationships, but hey, what choice do you have these days? As a matter of fact, most relationship problems are caused by an inability to articulate what we want, what we need, or how we feel to another person. And even worse, often because we don't have the ability to understand those things in our own mind. Most problems in the workplace happen because of miscommunicated expectations or knowledge that isn't shared appropriately between different people or areas. So here's the deal. Every feeling, impulse, frustration, emotion that you have buried deep in your subconscious mind is a string someone else can pull to manipulate you who is aware of it. A great, if not the greatest, subconscious influence on your words and speech is your desire to belong. This is why, with children, as soon as they learn how to speak, they also learn how to lie. It's always a bit shocking as a parent how quickly and effectively young children learn how to be deceptive and pick up line. After survival, a child's prime motivation is to feel love and accepted. So they learn that language can be used to avoid friction or garner praise in a relationship. So you can bet they're going to see how far they can stretch these new words they've learned to try and control your perception of them. As a side note, this is why you really shouldn't get angry with young children for lying. It's a survival instinct and perfectly natural. Obviously, we want to teach them better, but don't start assuming your kid's a bad kid. I won't go too much into that now, just a note. Even the accents that we carry come from a desire to fit in with those around us. If you are or have a friend of mixed ethnic background, just watch as not only their words, but even their accents will change a bit based on who they're talking to. This phenomenon is already known as something called code switching, which you may have already heard of. It's where people change their words, their accents, and their dialects based on who they're around to maximize their chances of fitting in. As a matter of fact, probably the best work on this subject is by the legendary philosophers Jordan Peele and Keegan-Michael Key.
Great. Unfortunately, the orchestra is already filled up, but they do have seats that are still left in the dress circle. So if you want me to get them theater tickets right now, I'm gonna do it right.
Okay, this may all seem like a tangent from where do words get their meaning, but it's critical because within the best philosophical paper on language, there's a missing ingredient to how our brains process words, and that's social acceptance. So the reality of where words get their meaning falls into three main sources: feeling, acceptance, and then reference. When we use a word, this goes through a filter in our brains, not only of how we feel about it, but how we think it relates to being accepted by those around us. Only at the end, if at all, does our word neatly put that definition in our brains in a referential hierarchy. And I say if at all, because feeling and acceptance are done by instinct, but reference is something that requires some level of conscious thought. And if we're honest, not everyone has that.
I know the human being and fish can coexist peacefully.
In case you're wondering, this is actually a recognized field of study in linguistics. It is called accommodation theory, or sometimes social constructivism. And I have links to everything I'm talking about in the video today in the description so that you can learn more about all these different ideas of language. Now, it's important for me to say that this is how language works for most people, the majority of people, but it's not how it works for all people. For example, autistic people often have a little bit of a disconnect in the brain to pick up on those subtle social interaction signals and in general process their feelings a little differently. So they don't always pick up, for example, on words that are inappropriate or understand why they're inappropriate. And they struggle often at a young age to pick up language, and it has no direct meaning to their intelligence. It's just that they are trying to process words by reference consciously. And when they look around and observe us and they're trying to learn a language, we don't make a lot of sense. For example, most people would try to be tactful when saying something like, hey, Chris, looks like you've lost some weight lately. Good job. But my son, who is high-function autistic, is more likely to say something like, hey, Dad, you look less fat. Thanks, son. By the way, this is also why girls often pick up on language faster than boys. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It's just that they tend to be a little more sensitive to all those subtle little social signals, so they're able to pick up on what these hidden meaning of words are. But in general, none of these things that happen at a young age regarding language are ultimately a definitive indication of intelligence. And I wish every parent would learn to understand that and just have a little more patience with their young children and stop trying to throw every program in the world at them just so they can feel better about them being top of their grade in the middle of kindergarten. But that's probably another video, so I'll move on. All right, so now we get to the critical part. While most people live their daily lives blissfully ignorant of all the different hidden meanings and subconscious origins of the meaning of words, there's a lot of people who spend a lot of their time very aware of those hidden meanings. These people are marketers, pundits, politicians, journalists, radio personalities, con artists, and cult leaders. The less effort that you have put into understanding the true meaning of words, the more these people have control over you. Here's some well-known examples. Thought-terminating cliches. These are phrases that have been conditioned into society that literally stop you from thinking. They are there to shut down conscious thought and just have everything return to normal. You've probably come in contact with these many times. It is what it is. It's none of my business. Be positive. That's just the way things are. I'll tell you when you're older. All of these are cliches used by people when they are content with the status quo and have no interest in questioning or changing anything. And instead of engaging in thoughtful discussion, they simply want to shut you down. Another great example, this time with politicians, is using the phrase support the troops to shut down any criticism of war or foreign policy. It exploits the dark irony of war that soldiers are bound to follow orders and therefore shouldn't be held culpable for their actions.
What's your sole purpose in this army?
To do whatever you tell me, drill sergeant.
But now you can't criticize those who are giving the orders because that's not supporting the troops. However, on the other side, sometimes thought-terminating cliches are so universally hated and so rejected that they immediately cause you to feel repulsed by hearing it. For example, conspiracy theory. This phrase has been so thoroughly tied to crazy people that it's hard to even hear the term come up without immediately feeling dismissive. Oh, it's one of those conspiracy theorists. But this is an example of manipulation at a large scale, and more people are aware of these little tricks, but I want to bring your attention to the small things, the little problems that seep into our language and truly drive our collective behavior. For example, many people acknowledge that we have a mental health crisis in this country. However, for all those people who say we need to remove the stigma of mental health, are also probably people who say things like, "Oh, what's wrong?" or "Are you okay?" when someone appears to be sad or crying. We don't realize that with such a innocent, subtle, and instinctive response to seeing someone sad or crying, we have already implied that something must be wrong with them or their circumstances. Now, they feel pressured to come up with a reason or explanation to justify why they're behaving the way they are to you that would meet that criteria of something being wrong. A better response is something like, "I'm here if you need anything." With this phrase, you have both created no expectations at all, while also making them feel welcome to approach you if they do in fact need to talk or need help with something. Another seemingly benign word is normal. People use this word every day as if it's harmless. Don't do that, it's not normal, or we need to get back to normal. Normal is one of the most deceptive and paradoxical words that we use in the English language, because it is always assumed to be a safe or harmless word, but it is in fact one of the most violent words we can ever say. Normal means that you have to act or be or talk or dress or do something in an expected way, or we, the society, are going to reject you. There is almost no way to use the word normal directed at a person that is not in reality a threat. For example, when The Gap launched an entire ad campaign with the message, "Dress normal," what they're really saying is, wear our clothes or society will reject you. The nature of the word normal being so disguised as benign and yet so effectively aggressive and intimidating is why the word is so frequently used by those who hold power or authority in a society. But even as inconspicuously harmful as these words or expressions are, people often use them in a way that is still mostly subconscious, instinctual, and completely ignorant of the underlying harm that they do. They are nothing compared to how subversively harmful language can be when done on purpose. Here are some tricks that you can see going on right now in our everyday lives. Associative clumping. This is when people take a word that has a negative emotion attached to it or gets a negative reaction in society and uses it to describe things that it originally had nothing to do with, thereby importing the negative emotions from the word now onto the thing we're describing. In politics, a good example of this on the right is the word woke. The word woke has become a term in society that carries an intense emotional reaction as being something that is ridiculous, over-emotional, absurd, or even divisive. So pundits and politicians can now use the term woke to simply describe just about anything they don't like. For example, if someone raises the completely reasonable issue of lack of accommodation for, say, autistic children in their schools, critics can call it a woke issue and immediately get the public to disregard it. What someone like Ron DeSantis didn't realize, however, is that if you do this too much, then you simply end up associating yourself with the word and all the negative emotions that become attached to it.
Woke, a war on woke. We'll fight the woke, to the woke, gonna leave woke where it belongs.
A good example on the left, just to be fair, is the word fascist. Fascist is a term that, at least for most of the century, has had an almost universally negative connotation to it. And while at the same time having almost no clear meaning or universally understood definition of what fascist actually means. So at this point, the word simply means anyone in authority I don't like. It is also a way of surreptitiously comparing people to Hitler without being caught using the childish habit of always comparing things to Hitler.
My insides are like Hitler.
Yeah, you can't just use the word Hitler in place of bad.
I have Nazis in my stomach.
The real pity, of course, is that by abusing this word, now when real fascists become apparent, we have no word left used to describe them, kind of like the boy who cried wolf, but in this case, it's the pundits who called fascists. So what I've called associative clumping here, this is also known as negative framing if you want to look it up online. Another term, emotional hijacking or loading. This is when you take a word that has a positive feeling attached to it, or at least a neutral feeling, and work very, very hard to give it a negative connotation. Again, I'll pick on both sides of the aisle. For example, the word feminism used to simply mean supporting equal rights for women. But now, the right-wing media has turned the word into a boogeyman for things like the obsolescence of men, which no one really intended it to mean. On the left, the word nationalism used to be pretty synonymous with patriotism, but now it's turned into a word that implies xenophobia and chauvinism. Just so you know, this concept is also known as semantic degradation. Okay, last concept here I'm going to go over, emotional sterilization. While emotionally loading a word can be effective for manipulation, the other direction works just as well. Taking a word that has an emotional meaning and insidiously and intentionally working very hard to remove all emotion from it so it sounds safe and innocent and no one reacts to it at all. The most legendary and all-time greatest manipulation trick ever in the history of humankind is that we took the word propaganda, which we all know is negative, and we turned it into public relations. This turned a blatantly malevolent movement in governments and corporations to try and control the social attitudes and thinking of the general public, and turned it into a harmless and respectable profession you can actually get a college degree for. I mean, no one wants to say, I have a degree in propaganda, but we will proudly tout our achievement in having a master's in public relations. I admit that I can't do as much justice to this particular form of semantic fuckery better than the legendary philosopher George Carlin. By the way, I don't know if YouTube's going to let me keep that rather long clip of George Carlin in my video, so if I did end up having to cut it, I put a link in the description. Now, as a little fun example, my son asked ChatGPT for a euphemistic way to call someone a dumbass, and it came up with, he faces cognitive challenges that require adapted strategies to facilitate his understanding. Great example, and frankly, I feel like that might even be more insulting. These tricks sound simple when I explain them, and you probably think you're too smart to fall for them.
When I snap my fingers, you're gonna be all hypnotized.
So let me get this straight.
When the cops can't do their jobs, they rely on voodoo.
But you're wrong. These things come at us so fast and so frequently in everyday life, in advertisements, on media, just everywhere we look, that it is impossible for our brain to filter them all out, especially since we're not always paying attention to the media we're consuming. They are so ingrained into our culture, and we are born into a world where this kind of dishonest use of language is very common. So it affects your thinking and influences your perspectives without you paying much attention to it. This is why to understand others and to know your own mind requires taking the time to question and inspect your own language. Politicians, pundits, and the powers that be have so much influence over our words that they can rob us of the ability to even communicate with each other. We think we're all speaking the same language, but in fact, all the words we use have different meanings to each person based on their background, their social circles, and the media they consume every day. We can think we're arguing about the same thing, but in our minds, we're actually talking about two completely different things. Okay, look, in this video, I can't cover all the ways that words and language are used to manipulate and to try and control your thinking. All I want to do is open your eyes to see how much language affects you, your personal development, and your relationship with other people. Because we define words primarily through our feelings and through our social interactions, but then we pretend and we fool ourselves into thinking that they have universal meanings. We leave ourselves open to being manipulated by those who understand our words more deeply than we do. All the while allowing those who actively harm society for their own benefit to hide behind mixed messages and meanings. As this series continues, I will continue to cover the examples of these words and terms and dissect their use in society. And as a matter of fact, if you have examples of phrases or words being used out there that you would like to see me cover, please let me know in the comments. This series is called Words Matter because words do matter. And if you're not mad about how they're being used, then you're not paying attention. I believe that man and fish can live in harmony together. That was a really good one.